I'll be building on everything I've been talking about so far, but I'm increasingly going to be moving into drawing in 3D. Now, when I say that, in SketchUp, you're always drawing in 3D. Sometimes it's just convenient to be thinking about what you're drawing in 2 dimensions before you're thinking about it in 3 dimensions. And I want to talk about that right away because when you first start a drawing, if you set your SketchUp up like mine, it'll look like this. If you jump to an isometric view, it will look like this. And if you jump back to a top-down view by clicking here, it will look like this. Now, those of you who are paying attention will notice that you didn't see this blue line before. And if you're not familiar with SketchUp, you may wonder what that is. That is the Z direction, or the up direction, from your base of your model, which is at the intersection of these 3 colors. Now, I don't really know why you don't see it right away, but when we are in perspective mode, you will see it. If you want that to go away, you have to turn off perspective by clicking on camera and clicking on parallel projection. So that blue line is still there, it's just coming straight at us, so we're not seeing it right in the middle of the screen here. And for most of this drawing, I will keep this in parallel projection. So I'm going to talk about curves, and we've already looked at the arc tool. I'll go ahead and just draw a small arc, making sure that I'm tangent at the 2 connection points up here. And I'm also going to talk about the freehand tool. Now, before I do the freehand tool, I'm going to draw a couple little helper graphics down here. If you're following along, you don't need to do this, but pay attention to where those 2 triangles are pointing, because I'm going to use those points along that edge. But the freehand tool, it's kind of an oddity in SketchUp because it's one of the only ones where you have to click and drag. I'm a big proponent of the click, release, click method, even though you can click and drag with a lot of these tools. But the freehand tool, you've really got no choice. You got to click and drag. And what I'm going to do here, very carefully, I'm going to start and stop directly on these edges. So you might want to watch this, pause it, and then rewind because it's actually quite tricky. But okay, I'm on that edge. I will click and start dragging. And I know what I did there. I caught myself doing it because it's that tricky. I actually dragged along that edge. So I'm going to go ahead and try this again. There, I think I got it that time. So that one, very carefully, I started and stopped on the edges. Now, third try, once again, I'm going to, before I release my mouse, see what happened? I'm touching that edge. I'm going to move my mouse over and then release at this point. So I drew along that edge, which is it's almost easier to do it accidentally than it is to do it intentionally. But it treats your segments differently. And one way to see that is to grab the select tool and try to click on one of those lines that you just drew. Now the center one, that's the one I got right. This one, I'm pretty sure I drew a little segment up there, and look what it did. For whatever reason, I don't know why, but by doing that, it creates a bunch of little segments. Same with this one, which I did it very intentionally. So just keep that in mind, and when we go to 3D, you'll see what kind of difference that turns into when we use the push-pull tool. Now, with just the pencil tool, you can draw contours, but it's not very easy because if I start up here, and if I wanted to somewhat mimic those lines that I just drew, well, the first one might not be so bad, but okay, so now it's snapping to basically everywhere but I want it to. The only way really around that is to keep zooming in and be very careful and very deliberate at where you're clicking. Kind of a pain, but it is possible. And I'm going to go ahead and just end that line right there. Now, you can also use the arc tool to create some very nice and pleasant looking curves by using that built-in tangency. So notice if I continue this from that end, it's tangent. So that line creates a nice look to it, and that's kind of nice for creating paths. So Very organic looking, kind of flowing path. But let's take a look at how all of these manifest themselves in 3D. So what I'll do is grab my select tool and I'll click in white space because I can see I've still got a little geometry selected there, which is why you want to get in the habit of just clicking in white space to deselect everything. And I'll jump to my isometric view. Now, good time to practice if you're not comfortable orbiting around this thing, orbiting beneath it, on top of it, zooming in and out. Little refresher, but keep in mind that you want to keep your cursor on top of a geometry as you're zooming. Otherwise, you might end up doing the flash forward to nowhere. And if that happens, you can just hit your zoom extents button over here. But I'm going to position my view about like this, grab the push-pull tool, and I'll start with the center piece right here. So click to start the move, click to set the move. Now take a look at that segment, how that is push-pulling, because each one of those was being seen by SketchUp as an individual segment. It creates a bunch of individual faces. Let's grab the push-pull tool, whoops, and let's deselect with that tool. Push-pull tool, click to start, click to stop. Very different, right? It's a smooth surface. Now, if you turn on your hidden geometry, we can see it's essentially the same thing. This is just conveniently smoothed. Still got the push-pull tool, and there's the third one, which I didn't quite do right. So keep in mind, you may wonder why sometimes your freehand tool gives you that, sometimes it gives you that. Let's go over here and push-pull this one. And I'll push-pull that one. When you use the arc tool, it gives you those lines at the point of tangency, where it meets and changes direction. So at this point, I want to talk about the eraser tool. A theme with SketchUp is that everything is deceptively simple. The eraser tool is no exception. And I've shown you how it only works on edges. So if I click on this surface, nothing happens. If I click on this edge here, that edge is erased. And because that is a coplanar edge, meaning that this surface, this face here, was not reliant at all on that segment to exist. So I can erase it and it's fine. However, this one, if I click and erase that one, look what happens. I lose two surfaces, one a very angled surface and that larger flat surface, because that edge is required for those surfaces to exist. I'm going to hit undo. All right, modifier keys. If you look in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, this will always tell you something different depending on the tool you have selected. Now with the eraser tool, I can see it said Shift equals hide and Option equals soften smooth. Whenever you see Option on a Mac, it usually means Control on a Windows machine. So Windows users, you will want to hold down Control. Mac users will want to hold down Option. And here's how that works. If I hold down Option and I can click on that surface, it smooths it just like it says. So very easy to come in here and clean that up. If I go back to this side, if you ever do run into this kind of thing, you can hold down Option or Control and drag. I'm dragging, I missed one here. Kind of a nice way to quickly go in and smooth edges like that. So what's the difference between smoothing and hiding? Well, you wouldn't really be able to see it too well with those curves because they're fairly subtle curves. So what I'm going to do is grab my polygon tool and I'll type 8S, hit enter to make that 8 sides, and then I'll pull that up. So I've talked about being very efficient in your modeling. If this was a geo model, we would probably want whatever this is to have the minimum effective amount of sides. So if I grab my eraser tool and I hold down Option or Control on Windows and click on those, it smooths that edge. So if you didn't have this top part, that's a fairly convincing round thing, whether it's a pillar or a tree trunk, it's smooth, which is kind of nice. On this side, I will hold down Shift and click. So that's essentially a hide edge function without erasing the surfaces. And if I turn on my hidden geometry, you can see the difference between a truly hidden edge, which is dashed like that, and a hidden / softened edge, because it will be kind of that dotted instead of that dashed. So let's go ahead and turn hidden geometry back off. I don't think there's really anything else I need to show you in this model, so now's a good time to select everything, hit delete, and I'll go back to my top-down mode. Now my axis is kind of off to the side for whatever reason. That's perfectly fine for the next step. So once again, we'll start by drawing a rectangle. And you know what? I'm going to undo that because I haven't talked about this. When you click to start your rectangle, you'll see two diagonal dashed lines popping up. One is when you are at a square, helpful for when you want to draw squares. The other is when you are at the golden ratio proportion, which is a very pleasing height to width ratio. So if you really want to buy into the golden ratio and make sure all of your rectangles adhere to that, you would want to keep that diagonal showing. So, all right, doesn't that look so much nicer than a non-golden ratio rectangle? Regardless, once you've got that drawn, maybe practice with the orbit tool again, just make sure you can get around fairly comfortably. I'm going to grab the rectangle tool again, and I'll start from this corner and draw a rectangle in like that. Actually, you know what? I'm going to undo that because I forgot a step. Before we do that, let's grab the push-pull tool and then just raise this up a set amount, making sure that it is a solid block. Oop, and hey, I'm actually glad we saw this. That is the notorious invisible plane clipping bug that rears its head in SketchUp. I guarantee that you will run across it at some point. Don't be alarmed. It's just a rendering thing that, whatever reason, has been built into, been a part of SketchUp that hasn't been taken care of. But to get rid of it, there's a few things you can do. In this order, just try zooming back and forth. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes it doesn't. The other thing you can try to is turning your perspective on and off. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. If neither one of those fix the problem, click on your Zoom Extents button over here, and then sometimes that will take care of it. So that's the invisible clipping plane. I guarantee you will be seeing it. Back to the model. Now, it's just surfaces and edges, but I'm referring to this as a solid, even though it's not really a solid, but I just want to make sure that it looks like that and not like that. Sometimes you may have push-pulling sometimes results in kind of an opening on the bottom. If you see that, just heal the surface. I've talked about healing the surface before. And reposition your view so that the solid blue line is pointing up. This is something else to be careful about. When people are first exploring SketchUp, I see them do this a lot where it's like, all right, kind of cool, I get it, right? Orbiting makes sense. And if you're watching closely, you'll see what I've done is I've actually flipped my model upside down because this light dashed line, that's the Z direction going down, and the solid Z direction is always going up. So I've seen people model entire buildings and landscapes upside down, and it causes problems. So if you get like that, just keep on orbiting until blue is going up. And once you're at this point, now we will grab the rectangle tool. I'll start a rectangle from that corner and just kind of hover roughly about there and click. So I want to talk about the push-pull tool. And I've mentioned, I'm a big fan of the click, release, click method to apply these tools. And here's a really good example of why you want to do that. If I click to start this push-pull, I can move my mouse up and down. But what's nice is you can still orbit. So if I press my middle wheel button and hold it, I'm in orbit mode. And as soon as I let go, I'm still in push-pull mode. Now this is a very, very simple model, but when your model gets really complicated and you're snapping all over the place, this can be very handy. So that's one reason. You can also pan. Now, you can still pan by pressing the middle wheel button and then the left button. And when I let go, magic, I'm still in the push-pull operation. If that's a little bit too difficult for you, you can always click on the navigation tools over here. So if I grab the hand tool, I'm in pan mode. As soon as I hit escape on my keyboard, I'm still in that push-pull mode until I left click to give it that second point. So that's one reason. There's a few other really good reasons why you want to get used to the click, release, click method as opposed to the click and drag method. Now here's another one. Inferencing. You can snap and inference to all sorts of things in your model. And there may be a situation that you want this top surface to be half the height of this first tier. Well, here's a way to do that. Click once to start the push-pull, and as you hover your cursor to the edge, you can see it's snapping to that midpoint. And if I were to click right there, it is now set to that precisely half the height of that other tier. Very convenient. Someone once asked me after I showed them this, well, what if you want that to be 1/3 or 1/5 or some number like that? You can do it, and there's a little kind of a side trick here. I suppose now is as good a time as any to show you. Grab the select tool and click on an edge to make sure that it is selected. Once it's highlighted, right click on it and select divide. So what's kind of cool here is after I've done that and I move my mouse up and down, I can see those dots showing me the number of divisions I'm about to apply to that segment. And just like most things in SketchUp, you can give it visual input by clicking on the mouse, or you can give it keyboard input. So I'll give it keyboard input here. I'll just type 3 and hit enter, and you can't quite see it, but that divided that into 3 separate segments. I can see it if I click on them individually. There we go. You can see the middle one. And that has now given me, I believe, 5 extra points that I can snap to. So if I go back to the push-pull tool, I will click to start the push-pull, and on that edge, I can now snap to the midpoint of the center segment, the end of the bottom segment, or the end of that top segment. So if I click here, now that is precisely 1/3. So there's all these really kind of neat proportioning tricks you can do without having to know the exact size of this. In this example, I haven't been paying attention to precise sizes or scales. I could if I wanted to, but again, just useful things to know. So not quite done with the push-pull tool yet, because I'm going to click on that surface once again. Very important. Whenever you push-pull 2 parallel surfaces together, they will cancel each other out. And you can kind of see those 2 colors changing there, where I can see the blue and the kind of lightish color. So that's called Z-fighting, and it means that those 2 surfaces are kind of competing. But what it actually means is if you click right there, they cancel out. So that's a really useful tool when you want to punch holes into things. And another example would be if we wanted to punch a hole through this, so not take out a corner, but actually punch a hole all the way through this. So for this next example, I will grab the circle tool and keep an eye on the lower right hand corner to see that it's set to 24 sides. If it is not set to 24 sides, go ahead and type 24S and hit enter just to make sure that that is. Now we will use some inferencing to set this circle exactly in the center of this square. Now if you're following along, it might be more of a rectangle. Either way, it's pretty easy to find the center of that. And we do it by encouraging these inference points. And we've done this before. So you hover just for a second over a midpoint, and as you move your mouse away, you can see that dashed line. And you can do this. It'll remember the last 5 points you've clicked or the last 5 points you've encouraged. So if I hover over that point, move my mouse, and now I can see that I'm inferring directly down and directly across. And another very important reason why you don't want to be getting too click and drag happy here. But with that point set, I can click to start, and I can either give it numeric input or just eye it. So you know what, I'll just eye it. That looks good. All I've done is created a new surface that I can select. I can select and delete. So I just hit delete, and now I'm kind of peeking into this box. I can see that it is in fact hollow. I'm going to go to undo, and I'm going to grab the push-pull tool, click on that surface to start the push-pull, and notice where my cursor is. I can click here, and if I were to click there, I'll go ahead and do that. Why not? You know, that is push-pulled half the distance of whatever that segment was. But I'll click on it again, And if I want that to line up precisely with this edge, I don't need to be on the edge. I can, but I can actually be anywhere on that surface. Sometimes. That's being a little weird on me now, but maybe I will pick that edge just to make sure it's lined up. There we go. If I go to my plan view, oops, over here, I can see that that is lined up perfectly. You know what? And while I'm here, let's take a look at perspective. You can always tell that you were in perspective because you'll see that blue line there, and you'll start to see the edges of that, any vertical sides that you may have in your model. Zoom back out, orbit around. All right, so that push-pull thing for canceling out two faces, here's another example of where that can be helpful. I will start the push-pull, and notice where my cursor is at. I'm touching an edge on a surface that I know is parallel to the one I'm push-pulling. What does that mean? Well, if I were to click, they would cancel out. Before I click, let me orbit around because it might be easier to see from this side. So click, hole punched right through there. And if you're feeling challenged, turn on your perspective and see if you can't drive right through that hole and get back out again in one piece. Go back, parallel projection, and I'm going to undo that because here's a common problem I see. People do stuff like that. They'll start the push-pull and they'll go back here and look where my cursor is at now. I'm not touching anything, so I'm really push-pulling this to kind of an arbitrary spot. And even though I can't see it, I'm fairly sure I'm not going to be touching and canceling those faces out. So, people might click this, click at that location thinking they've punched that all the way through, but all they've really done is kind of turned it inside out. And I could fix it by push-pulling from this side, taken care of. But just keep that in mind. You always want to, take advantage of that push-pull and knowing where your cursor is at. For example, push-pull successfully punched through. All right, so let me show you an example where you don't have the convenience of two parallel faces meeting each other to be canceled out. So for this one, what I'm going to do is push-pull this shape out a little bit more. And I'll grab my arc tool. And on this top surface here, I'm going to draw a curve like that. And go ahead and I'll push-pull that down and cancel that out. So now I've got kind of this non-straight face, this surface, on the opposite side of this flat face here. I'll do the same steps I did before, and you know what, this time we'll do how about a hexagon? 6S, enter with the polygon tool. Just like before, I can encourage these 2 points because I am a perfectionist and I want that to be right in the center. Click to start, click to set the other point. Well, as hard as you may try it, you will never find a snapping point where this conveniently lines up. So here's a situation where I actually would want to just push it all the way through. Just make sure it's all the way through. You can go as far as you want, but you want it to go all the way through. Now in a situation like this, I'll be talking more about this in another video, but it's good to just address it at this point. I'm going to select everything with all those geometries selected. I'm going to right click, hover over intersect faces, and intersect with selection. What this does is wherever there's a geometry that overlaps, it creates a very convenient geometry or a geometry line. So look what happened right on this edge. Kind of neat. So if I zoom out, I will drag a bounding box from right to left, not a selection window. Remember the difference between those two. If I drag from right to left, it's grabbing that face as well as these faces because they cross the bounding window. And then I'll hit delete on my keyboard. Now I've got one more face here. That one I can just right click on and select erase. But what I've done is effectively punched a hole into a curved surface. And let's turn on our hidden geometry. You can see how that worked. So it's kind of a nice little trick to know. Oh, I see I've got a couple floating hidden geometry pieces out here for some reason. Let's highlight those and delete them. All right, so the last thing that I'll show you which is really kind of a little bonus thing here because I will be talking about this more definitely later on. But I am going to draw two rectangles on the top of the surface and push-pull them both. I'll make this one a little bit shorter than the other one. I'm going to grab this segment here and then grab my move tool. Now keep in mind, you can do the pre-select or the active select. Here's a situation where I'm intentionally doing a pre-select because I want to click here and move this in the blue direction. Oh, I'm just going to eye it just a little bit, just so it's kind of a shallow angle like that. All right, here's kind of the neat thing here. I'm going to grab the select tool. I'll grab this edge here, and I'll grab the move tool again, click to start the move, make sure that you're in the blue direction, and once you're sure you're in the blue direction, hold down Shift on your keyboard. Talked about that in one of the first videos. That makes sure that it's locked to that. So now I can move my mouse side to side, and as I'm holding down Shift, it stays locked in the blue direction. And as I'm doing that, I can orbit. So now I'm really, actually I can't orbit because I've got Shift held down. Let's do it this way. Grab the orbit tool. Oh, can't do that either. Oh, I messed that one up really good. Let me undo that. Too many keys. So backing up, move that one down, grabbing that edge. I'm going to orbit first this time because I had troubles. Grab the move tool, start the move. Once you find the blue direction, hold down Shift, and look what happens when I move my cursor on and off of that surface. You won't really see how cool this is until the next move, but just trust me, infer from that slope. So you can infer points directly across, such as this, such as that endpoint, but I'm going to infer from this slope. Click. Now that edge is set. All right, let's do the same thing with this edge over here. Pre-select it, grab the move tool, start the move, hold down Shift, once you got in the blue direction that is, hold down Shift, infer that same slope. Now if I look at this from the side, and I did just click there, those are perfectly lined up. So that slope is continued from here down to here. Now that will be very useful for a lot of reasons, but just wanted to quickly show you in this video. And before we move on to some other things, I think I'm going to end it here. As always, play around with these examples and let me know if you have any questions. I suggest you really understand everything up to this point. That last little bit was just an example of how quickly we will be ramping up these walkthroughs.